This video is brought to you by Squarespace. From websites and online stores to marketing tools and analytics, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence and run your business. What stories and lives, histories, and tales are attached to a painting? Sometimes they may be more interesting than the work itself, and this painting is no exception. A darling portrait of a young boy, this one a descendant of Thomas Macy, who in 1659 was among the first Englishmen to purchase land on Nantucket. Painted by the German-American artist Nicola Marshall, whose great claim to fame was being the designer of the original Confederate flag, the Stars and Bars. The painting itself is filthy, with accumulated surface grime and old varnish obscuring the original paint, not to mention the massive tear through the canvas. Complicating an otherwise fairly straightforward conservation is the stamp on the verso, which the client is insistent not be covered up by any repairs. But these are the challenges that make this work exciting and, dare I say, fun. And while we may have to alter our approach to achieve the desired outcome, I'm confident that this painting can be saved, and I may just learn something along the way. Now, working on an oval painting is really no different than a square one. I mean, they take up roughly the same space, except this one is an oval space and not a square space. Squarespace. All kidding aside, Squarespace is the all-in-one, comprehensive, flexible, and dynamic website building service. With a few clicks, you can build and launch your own space in a matter of minutes. And whether that's to host an online store to sell items, schedule appointments for services, host a gallery space to display your own artwork, or just have a little corner of the web to call your own, Squarespace can make it happen. And Squarespace knows that just wanting it doesn't make it so they have robust help features if in case you need them. So head over to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Baumgartner to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. While it might be possible to conserve this painting without removing it from the support, it would leave a lot on the table, and not just tacks and dust and dirt. There are a lot of treatments that need the painting off of the support, and so once I've removed all of those tacks, I'll carefully remove the stretcher from the painting. It's easier to remove the stretcher from the painting than it is the other way around, because this keeps the canvas flat, and if I find any errant tacks, I can simply lower the stretcher back down and remove them. As this painting was stored, well, who knows where, there is a lot of accumulated grime between the stretcher bar and the canvas. We can see dust and dirt, even pine needles, maybe from a Christmas tree or who knows where. These will all be loosened up with a brush and then vacuumed up. And once all of that debris is gone, the painting can be transferred over to the heated vacuum table for the first treatment. A slight amount of water is added to the back of the canvas to soften it, as it's pretty brittle. Then I'll wrap the entire perimeter of the painting with some cotton webbing, which will facilitate the extraction of the air from the envelope that I'll then create with a piece of mylar. This air needs to be removed so that we have comprehensive and even downward pressure on the painting. I'll tape the mylar down to create an airtight seal, and then once all of the edges are secured, I can connect the through bag connectors by piercing the mylar and placing them in place. These will draw out the air once the vacuum pump is turned on, and now the painting is under complete even pressure. The table's been heated up, and while it warms up, I'll use the bone folder to work the tear flat. After the painting has been allowed to sit under heat and pressure for a while, and then cooled to room temperature, I'll turn the vacuum pump off and remove the painting from this envelope, taking care not to destroy any of this plastic film, as I can reuse it many times. Once the through bag connectors are off, the mylar can be lifted off and flipped over due to the hinged tape on the back, the cotton webbing removed, and the painting transferred over to another table, where it will go under weight for a couple of days to slowly acclimatize to the studio's relative humidity. As the painting is now flat, we'd like to keep it that way, and simply leaving it in ambient temperature and humidity will cause it to distort and ripple. A piece of felt is added on top just to protect the face of the painting. While the painting rests under weight, I can turn my attention to this support. While it's in generally good condition, I did notice a couple areas of damage, and as it's my charge, I'm going to conserve and repair this as well. The first step is to disassemble this, and then I need to mark out where the inlays of the new pieces are going to go, and trim off some of the old wood that's damaged. I'll use a Japanese saw and chisels to create a recess which will receive the new wood. Once it's trimmed and fits nicely, I can glue it in place. This does need to be a permanent fix, so I'm using standard wood glue here. The pieces are oversized and they'll get trimmed down later on once the glue has allowed to dry. Other areas where pieces have broken off are also glued and clamped and once again left to dry. With the glue now dry, I can take the clamps off and start trimming down the excess wood from the patches that I inlaid. Using a combination of saws and chisels and eventually some sandpaper, I'll smooth them down until they are adequately fit and flush. In addition to the patches, I'm going to need to carve in a recess or a slot for the key to be received, and I'll do that with a saw and a file. After a few days of resting under weights, I can remove the painting and start on with the rest of the conservation. We can see here that the painting is nice and flat and hasn't distorted, which is precisely why we did that extra step. Back to the front room, I can now start to think about the structural work that needs to take place on this pretty big tear. A tear of this size might be repaired in another way, perhaps with a lining or an interleafed lining, but the client was really insistent here that none of the inscription on the back, or the canvas stamp on the back, which you can see right there under my hands, would be lost or covered. We discussed multiple approaches to preserving this, and ultimately we settled on using a technique, a hybrid of sorts, using bridging with thermoplastic welding powder. Now this has pros and cons. Pros are that it will not interfere with the visibility of this stamp. Cons are that in the future, if there are excessive humidity changes or rapid humidity changes in the environment this painting lives in, this tear could become visible over time. With the lining process, that wouldn't be the case, but the client was pretty insistent, and they understood the compromises that we sometimes have to make, so this is why we settled on this approach. Once the thermoplastic welding powder has been bonded to the edges of the canvas with a little bit of adhesive, I'll come back with a tacking iron and slowly heat it up and cause it to fuse. This is a pretty solid repair right now, but I'm taking a belt and suspenders approach, and so I'm also going to do the bridging technique, which relies on little strands of Belgian linen laid down perpendicularly across the tear after being dipped in adhesive. This is much like a butterfly suture in surgery. It doesn't penetrate into the canvas, it sits on the surface, but it is pretty lightweight as compared to a patch or a lining. This will help hold that down and make sure that if there are humidity changes, this repair does stand a chance. After a couple days under weight, I'm now ready to start the cleaning. And this is going to be really exciting because my initial tests revealed that this painting is really, really grimy and dirty. And so I start on the edge with a neutral organic soap. I've previously tested this soap, so I'm confident in its reaction and it being safe, but I still start on the edge just in case. though the painting is quite brighter now, there is still an old varnish on the surface of the painting, and so my attention will now be turned to removing that. Again, using a solvent mixture that I previously tested to be safe on the painting, I'll start on the edge and start lifting off that varnish, which you can see here, shiny and blotchy. With the painting now clean, I can turn my attention to more structural work. In this case, I need to add a strip lining to the edge of the canvas, because the original tacking edge, the part of the canvas that's not painted, that the tacks go into to secure it to the stretcher, is really compromised. You can see that it's brittle and the tacks have pulled out. So I'll start by ironing on a reversible thermoplastic conservation adhesive. And then I'll start laying out my strip lining. And this is Belgian linen. As I go along, I'll tack, fold, tack, and then I'll cut 2 layers of canvas so we have a nice even seam. You can see just how nicely that lines up. So again, tack, fold, tack, cut. And I'll do this around the entire canvas, and then I'll come back with my iron and my weight and affix all of it down. Now at this point, I'm going to take the opportunity to do the fill in because the canvas is flat and on the table, which allows me to put a little bit more pressure and to have a flat surface to work on. This could certainly be done after the stretching process, but it could put more pressure on the canvas, and that's something that we don't want. It's now time to marry the painting with the repaired stretcher support. On an oval painting, it's a little bit trickier to get everything aligned, but it's not terribly difficult. It just takes a little bit more time. And then, once in its place, I'll drive a few tacks in on the 4 edges, so to speak. And this is just to hold it in place and give me a starting point to work as I move along the edges tacking. After securing the painting to the stretcher, I'll remove the nails that were driven in to hold the oval stretcher square and to make sure it doesn't distort as I stretch the painting. And then I can go ahead and tidy up the back. And here I will fold and overlap all of those little pieces. It's important to note that I use lots of little pieces as opposed to one piece that's had an oval cut out, because this ensures that the canvas won't deform. All of the grain of the canvas, the warp and the weft, is all in the same orientation relative to the middle of the painting. So when I pull on all of those pieces to stretch the painting, they're not distorting. After keying out the painting, adding these little wooden wedges which expand the stretcher and add tension, I'll secure them in place with a fishing line. And then I can remove any excess fill-in that I didn't get on the first pass. It's at this point that I'm going to apply the first coating of varnish, a synthetic resin that's ultraviolet stable. And you can see instantaneously how the painting starts to come alive. This is what the painting is going to look like. And this varnish application allows me to execute my retouching according to this, not a dried out painting. At my easel, with my adjustable temperature lights, I'll set my palette up with fully archival and reversible conservation paints, and I'll begin to add paint wherever paint is missing, and nowhere else. Now, with all of the retouching complete, I'm going to apply a final coat of varnish. And this one is mostly to adjust the sheen and make sure that the retouching paints match with the overall painting and don't stand out. Here I can make it glossier or more matte as I see fit. We always knew this was a beautiful painting, executed with sensitivity and grace and capturing such a sweet time in childhood. But we couldn't see that because the painting was wavy, ripply. It was filthy dirty, and of course it had a massive tear in it that drew our attention away from all of the characteristics that we want to see to something we didn't want to see. But now, with all of those issues gone, the painting is resplendent in all its glory. We can see the beautiful cloud, we can see the beautiful lace. The expression of the child is free from interference of the tear. And that tear? Gone, even in raking light, which allows us to see the painting without distraction at all. Now, the client was pretty insistent that I didn't cover up any of the stamp on the back, and this approach, while it took a little bit more time and finesse, has allowed us to do just that. We can see the stamp, we can see the repair, and that's it. A minimal intervention, one that respects the artist's intent, the object, the client's wishes, all within a framework that's ethically sound for the conservator. Now that is a job well done. I've done this thousands of times, and yet when I see a transformation like this, I can't help but smile, because I know my client is going to get this painting back and do just the same.